Well, I didn't think this day would ever arrive. I'm so happy to be able to share some of this information with you today. We're going to talk about Great Plant Picks, which is an educational outreach program of the Elizabeth Miller Botanical Garden. By the way, the Elizabeth Miller Botanical Garden is located in the Seattle area. But those plants we're going to show you today are going to be truly superheroes in your landscape. Now you're probably wondering just what makes a plant a superhero. Well, listed here are the criteria that Richie Steffen, who is executive director of the Elizabeth Miller Garden and its educational outreach program, Great Plant Picks, he was asked to meet this criteria when recommending plants for this presentation. Well, I must tell you, he really rose to the challenge and provided us with some wonderful plants that can grow in a range of soils, needs moderate or less supplemental water, can tolerate periods of extreme heat, are cold hardy in USD Zone 7, not prone to plant disease problems, not prone to pest problems, and offer at least 3 seasons of interest in the garden. Well, I have to tell you, he provided us with such an abundance of plants that today we can only name a few of them, or we'd be keeping you all day long. But we have assembled a series of handouts that you'll be able to access to see the full list of plants that meet this impressive criteria. The plant resource list will be included at the end of the presentation. But before we share any plants, I'd like to tell you just a little bit more about Great Plant Picks. As I said, it's an educational outreach program of the Elizabeth Miller Botanical Garden with a singular mission to provide the home gardener with a list of reliable plants for the Maritime Pacific Northwest. They have such an easy-to-use website, and it provides comprehensive information about selected plants, some you may wish to use in your landscape. Great Plant Picks really uses a plant trial method using a committee of experts who will test the plants in public gardens and private landscapes over a period of 1 to 2 years, and sometimes longer, in order to ensure that they meet the standard of excellence for the Pacific Northwest gardener. They also work in cooperation with extension programs in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia in order to keep abreast of the latest in research. Now, using the Great Plant Picks website is quite easy. Just follow the link to the browser and either search for a particular plant you may want to know more about, or use the key to find a list of plants that meet the criteria you've selected to suit your landscape requirements. They also have helpful lists that address planting containers, plants for small gardens, plants that are drought tolerant, fragrant plants, shade gardening plants. You just need to click on the category that interests you, and you will find a number of plants that will meet the criteria you're listing. Now, with all those criteria in mind, I decided that I would talk to you first about superhero plants that will thrive in shade. Now, this is for the number of you who have an area in your landscape that receives only dappled or filtered sunlight. But of course, plants are expensive, and you want ones that you select to be tolerant of different soils, be pest and disease resistant, be a bit drought tolerant after establishment, and offer the more than 1 season of interest. Here we go. Let's start with some trees that work well in shade. One of my very favorites, vine maple. It's one of the best native trees for a small garden. This deciduous tree is closely related to Japanese maples and is just as effective in the garden. In its natural setting, this tree variety is found flourishing in the understory of a conifer or deciduous forest. It provides you with lovely green leaves on a multi-stem tree, which turn red-orange in the fall. And the structure of the trunks provides striking winter interest in your garden. Paperbark maple, or Acer griseum, is another broadleaf deciduous tree. but it possesses a wonderful coppery red bark that will exfoliate, kind of like paper. Very attractive in winter. Has lovely greenish flowers in the spring and beautiful fall color that will appear even if this plant isn't planted into shade. And that color will range from green to pumpkin orange to red. If it's in very deep shade, you might find that the color will be a little more apricot than it is brick red or orange or pumpkin orange. It's a really wonderful tree for a small garden. It has a very nice upright growing habit, and it needs little to no pruning. You'd only need to prune it if there's a broken branch or for some reason one branch is dead. It's tough and it's easy to love. And the one I have in my landscape, I have to tell you, whenever I can see it, and I can see it from my windows all the time, it's pretty pleasing to my eye in all seasons. Another lovely maple. This tree is attractive and durable. It has a rough, knobby bark that will provide winter interest in your garden. And at its maturity, which is about 30 feet by 25 feet, it will provide a fine textured canopy with its small leaves that will turn apricot and gold in the fall season. The non-aggressive roots of this maple will not destroy or damage patios, sidewalks, or foundations, making it really perfect for a small garden. We've all had to replace that sidewalk that got taken up by a maple tree. The cornelian cherry dogwood, a beauty, a stunning late winter bloomer. These wonderful fat yellow blossoms, and you can see them right here in this upper or in this middle photo here. I've kind of highlighted it with my laser pointer. In the dreary days, which are gray and maybe we have rain, this will appear. This slow growing tree appreciates having well-drained soil, but otherwise it's very adaptable and will tolerate a wide variety of soil conditions. As it ages, its bark will peel into a gray, brown, and kind of tan patches, which gives it nice winter interest. This plant is native to Central and Southern Europe and Southwestern Asia, and it's been in cultivation since ancient times. It produces this lovely red fruit in late summer, and in the fall, the leaves turn a lovely red, rich red, purple red. I mean, this tree just keeps on giving. It's really a knockout. Going to make a little switch and talk about some conifers that may provide that green backdrop you're looking for, or a pyramidal shape that you're seeking in your landscape. This is the dwarf hinoki cypress, or Chamaecyparis obtusa nanogracilis, and it is very slow growing, which is pretty nice if you have a small yard. The shiny foliage, as you can see in this picture on the left, grow in overlapping fan shapes. This plant will demand nothing much in the way of maintenance. The only thing you need to do is perhaps remove some dead limbs from time to time. And there are two other false cypress varieties that are also easy to care for and tolerate a wide variety of conditions. And I've listed them here on the slide. Dwarf hinoki cypress castiri and dwarf hinoki cypress nana. Both of them are lovely. They differ mainly in the height and width of their shape. Be sure to check these at the nursery because you're kind of particular if you're buying an expensive and nice evergreen plant to put in your yard. So check them out to make sure that they are doing what you want in the landscape. Sargent's weeping hemlock pendula. Oh, this conifer looks good at all of its ages. It kind of begins with a mounded shape, but as it matures, it extends these magnificent wings of lovely foliage that weep as they cascade toward the ground. This one does require water and space to perform best, and you can tell by looking at this mature size here. This is gorgeous the way it's tumbled onto this terrace. It can hold its own when it's partnered with rhodies and viburnums, camellias, or Oregon grape. And what's really cool about that is the contrast between the delicate foliage of this weeping hemlock and the camellias and the viburnums and the rhodies is that it makes a nice contrast in your garden. something the eye is always looking for. And this plant just has excellent texture. Now we're going to look at some shrubs that enjoy shade. This is the classic red twig dogwood. It's also called by some as red osier dogwood. Really easy to grow and quite adaptable and tolerant of many soil conditions and delightful year-round. It's a pretty vigorous growing plant. I have one in my yard, and those bright red stems look dramatic in the winter. It's really a joy. It produces these lovely white blossoms in spring, followed by berries that the birds adore. It doesn't ask for much, but it keeps on giving throughout all the seasons. There is another cultivar of this plant that is a superhero, the variegated red twig dogwood that I have added here. It might turn out that in your shade garden, you would like something that's more of a wonderful yellow-green variegated foliage. That might be a better choice for you, so be sure to check it out. Highly recommend this. I love mine. Now, who doesn't embrace a shrub that blooms in the January and February when the garden seems like it's absolutely dead and dormant? This hybrid of the native Mahonia is really a striking plant in the landscape. It has a vase shape and frond-like leaves that grow in whorls around the stem. Their beautiful yellow blossoms in winter are followed by black berries that appear from summer through the fall. It makes a very bold, strong statement in the garden. As at maturity, it's 15 feet tall and 8 feet wide. An interesting fact, this hybrid began as a chance seedling of Mahonia japonica and Mahonia lamerifolia in a Northern Ireland nursery. That's kind of a geek note, but it's interesting. There are two other hybrids of this plant that are about the same mature size as Charity. They're Mahonia ex media Arthur Menzies and Mahonia ex media Winter Sun. And I listed them here for you to explore if you choose to do so. And I have to tell you, when I take long walks in my neighborhood, and when I was walking in January and February in the gray gloom, it was really fun to see these guys blooming in people's gardens. Evergreen huckleberry. A lovely underused shrub. I think it's maybe an unexplored shrub. People maybe just overlook it. It has a rounded shape, and as you can see in this picture, very small leaves. But when it puts on new growth in the springtime, it's a beautiful coppery bronze that then matures to this lovely green color. Aren't these darling little flowers? They're urn-shaped and kind of pinkish white. They become blue-black berries by late summer, which can be used in jams and jellies. This native plant was brought into cultivation by David Douglas in the 1800s. It's been around a long time. Many people use it as a hedge because it is very easily pruned. And as you can see, it's really loved by birds for all the berries that it produces. There might not be too many left for you because the birds really do adore it. I use it as a short hedge, and it has proven to be easy to care for and rewarding to have in the garden. Variegated Japanese Akuba, Mr. Goldstrike. Well, that name gives you a clue that it's pretty bold and gold and brings out the best of a shaded area. It thrives in dry shade, which is pretty unusual and much desired by many people. It's very carefree. It's slow growing and drought tolerant once established. And as you can see from the photo on the right, it's really not leggy. It has foliage that grows clear down to the ground. So it's really a lovely mounded looking shrub. And it will create a pop of color in a deeply shaded area. Darwin's barberry, or Berberis darwini. Now, this native of Chile is not only tough, but attractive. It has these wonderful arching branches. You can see from the photo that it becomes a mass of flowers in the spring, in about March. And then it produces lovely fruits that are a magnet for the wildlife. Now, this variety of Berberis is a little less prickly than some, And as a result, it's often used as a hedge since it has these lovely year-round dark shiny leaves. So it's always full and makes a lovely hedge. Another berberis. This is warty barberry. It offers a lot of structural interest in the garden. It's really dense, as you can see from the photo on the lower right. And it also has arching branches that produce yellow flowers in the spring. But as you can tell from the upper left-hand picture that it is a little bit prickly. It does possess sharp spines, which would make it perfect for a barrier hedge. It's really low in maintenance, and in the foliage is a burgundy blush during the winter season. So you can see you get a lot of bang for your buck with this one. It's a nice selection, even with this prickly barbs. Bearberry cotoneaster. Now, cotoneaster I think of as kind of an old style garden plant. It's tough and it's versatile and it's compact. It makes a great foundation plant. It's also a great rock garden plant, or as you can see in this picture, cascading over a rock wall. Low growing, it's only about 6 inches in height at maturity. It also does well, like in this lower right picture, as an edging plant. White flowers in the spring, brilliant red berries, adds a lot of interest to your garden. I have this variety, and I happen to grow it in a very shaded area, and it really likes it there. It just kind of snakes along and does its thing. It's very, very low maintenance. It will tolerate some full sun, but it prefers to have well-drained soil. It'll not only offer structural interest to your garden, but it will attract wildlife. Dwarf sweetbox. Now, what's not to love about this easy, shade-loving evergreen shrub? It produces those tiny white flowers in the spring that you kind of almost don't even notice until you smell this fragrance kind of floating around the garden and your nose takes you around to find out where it is. It has these dark, shiny leaves all year round, and it makes an excellent backdrop for other flowering plants. It does not usually require any pruning, but just only to remove any dead bits. But it will take pruning with no problem. Now, if the weather becomes really, really severe, such as the ice storm that we had, you may notice that we'll lose all of its leaves and look really, really sad for a bit, but those leaves will quickly grow back when the weather moderates. So this shrub is a toughie. Now, some perennials. Perennials for shade are always a request that I get from gardeners when they want to know, what should I do in my shade? Well, here are a few you might like to try. Heartleaf Bergenia. I have to tell you, I've always noticed that older, wiser gardeners grow Bergenia, and I probably should have taken a page out of their book because they are beautiful. I've seen them with pink blooms, but they also have white that's popular. It seems like pink is more dominant when I'm walking around the neighborhood looking for Bergenia. This evergreen plant does very well in rock gardens and it has a really long bloom period from May clear till June. It has extremely impressive 8 to 10-inch foliage that becomes bronze tinged during the wintertime. They look particularly impressive when they're planted next to fine textured plants that give contrast to it. Note in this picture right here, there's a conifer in the back with very delicate foliage. It looks very nice contrasted with the Bergenia in the front. Inside out flower. This native plant can be a lovely ground cover if it receives enough moisture during the very warmest of months. It's a slow grower, just about, 10 inches tall, and its tiny white flower that pops in spring is not, real striking. You'll see it there if you're looking. This plant does propagate via rhizomes underground, but it will not become invasive. And if you notice here in this lower left picture, it has a little duck-footed foliage. So for that reason, many people refer to it as the duck plant. These leaves of web-footed foliage will turn yellow in the fall, and that's a signal to you that they need to be pruned to the ground so that they can begin again. Evergreen redwood sorrel, Oxalis oregana, the evergreen form. Now this is another slow-growing Pacific Northwest native that is perfect if you're seeking a woodland garden in your shaded area. Lovely small white flowers, a bit more prominent than with the inside out flower. And this plant is blooming right now. And the nice part is that the leaves, which are green on top, have lovely burgundy coloring underneath. This plant spreads through rhizomes underground, and it ranges from about 2.5 inches to 4 inches in height. I absolutely love mine because it gives my garden a lovely woodland appearance, and it keeps down weeds, and you have this lovely green carpet in its place. Giant Trillium, Trillium chloropetalum, unsurpassed in its size and garden presence, and who does not stop and take a second look when you see them in a garden or in the wild? And by the way, if you take a sniff, you'll find out they have a lovely rose scent. These are impressive 18-inch stalks that will form a bunch, but I have to tell you, it will take some time. Trilliums take patience, since it can be 3 to 5 years before young plants will even provide you with a bloom. If they're planted in very, very deep shade, they don't produce as many blooms as if they have a bit more sun. And by the way, the thing I discovered is they just do not wish to compete with other flowers. They want to be kind of on their own. And when you think about their natural environment, they are an understory plant for a conifer deciduous forest, and nothing much interferes with them. So I find that if I plant them in a space that I do not disturb much during the year, I have greater success at getting them to spread. I pictured here on the lower left the white blooming variety as well. And of course, because you're an avid gardener, I don't have to tell you, don't pick the trilliums, please. Persian violet or cyclamen coum. I have to tell you, I love these beautiful cyclamen. This variety is blooms from, well, sometimes as early as December, but typically they bloom from February and into March. And you know, it can be gloomy. They're a lovely welcome sight. They propagate by seeds that are actually a little bit sweet, so the ants carry them all around your garden. It's just kind of an adventure. Watch for new plants popping up in your landscape. I always love a little garden surprise. These guys come in a variety of colors from white to magenta and pink, but their foliage is so attractive. I almost wouldn't care if they didn't bloom at all because they have this lovely silver highlights in the foliage. These plants do go summer dormant, so while it may look like they're gone or they're dead, they're still viable. And since they do so well growing in dry shade, they really will flourish at the base of large trees. And I'm always searching for something that will grow well underneath my really big trees. Give this one a try. Ferns. Ferns are adaptable and thrive in the shade. A typical understory plant, the following ferns are maybe some that you have not explored before. Soft shield fern. This delicate looking fern is tough and will tolerate no water once you get it going and get it established. It's a great addition to your woodland garden because the texture it offers is a bit different than, say, a sword fern or a maidenhair fern. It can be planted singly in the landscape as a focal point, but it looks especially nice when it's planted next to a log or in a rocky area because it adds height and textural interest. If this is one you haven't tried, you might think about it. Maidenhair spleen mort. Now I love this little guy. This tiny evergreen fern is tough. Once you get it established, there's not much you can do to disturb it anymore. It'll just go and go and go. It's kind of a miniature version of the sword fern, and it's perfect for growing under large conifers or with other woodland plants. Mine is growing next to a water feature, and it's good. It's got good scale. Its small size makes it a perfect scale for that particular situation. And because it's a superhero plant, It will be tolerant of lots of different soil types and be tolerant of dry shade once it gets going and gets really well established. I think it's a darling addition to the garden. Okay, we talked all about shade. Now we're going to move on to something that's opposite of shade. Superhero plants for pollinators. Plants that appeal to hummingbirds, birds, bees, and butterflies. I'm going to include some trees, some shrubs, and some perennial plants. And as you know, most of the selection will thrive in full sun, 6 to 8 hours, as pollinators are attracted to plants that seem to be in full sun. So I always like to start with trees. They're always such a bigger statement in the landscape. By the way, this is a mountain hemlock pictured in this photo. I love my mountain hemlock. It's a slow-growing evergreen tree that can be grown in a pot or placed in your landscape. Dwarf Sargent's crabapple, Tina. Well, this lovely dwarf is absolutely perfect for a small garden or pot on a terrace or patio. It's only 4 feet by 5 feet at maturity, and it's going to gift you with white blooms in the spring, followed by red fruit. Well, birds adore this selection. It does need to be pruned when it is young to ensure good structure, as it's grafted on a 4-foot trunk stock. So I've included a link here to our pruning videos presented by Tennessee University. This tree will become drought tolerant and, like many pollinator plants, expects to have 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. Another Pacific Northwest native. I did not realize this short pine was so attractive to butterflies, moths, and hummingbirds. And it has this wonderful contorted structure. I mean, I always kind of like a tortured looking plant in my landscape. It gives great structural interest. But you can easily prune it into a shape that will be pleasing for your garden. It likes wet soils, so it takes wet soils really well, but of course it prefers full sun. If you were to let it grow in its natural shape and size, it will provide you with a lovely green backdrop for the remainder of your garden. Pest and disease resistant, it will support butterflies, moths, and hummingbirds. And now for a few shrubs. Some of these are really great looking. The strawberry tree. Now, while it's called a tree, this is really a 4-season shrub. It's evergreen, and it will produce these little urn-shaped flowers from October to December. They're kind of whitish pink. Then these round 3/4 inch fruits develop that can be from yellow to red orange. The cinnamon bark of this plant as an attractive statement against its gorgeous dark green foliage, and it's kind of shiny too. Now, as I looked at this one, I thought, this is really a gorgeous thing, but it's 20 by 20, that mature size might be just a little bit too much for my landscape. But there's also a compacta version of this plant that you might like to check out. Its mature size is 10 feet by 10 feet. Gold variegated Abelia kaleidoscope. I accidentally found this shrub. I have several of them in my landscape now, and they're quite easy to maintain. They provide color in 3 seasons and are attractive to bees and butterflies. This lime-tinged foliage and mass of white light-scented blooms makes it a winner in my garden. It's also easy to prune to keep into shape if necessary. And when you do that, it just responds with more foliage and more flowering. I adore it. And I will tell you that the flower is not outstanding. You won't, like in here, you will not really notice it, but the insects notice it, particularly the bees. Glossy Abelia Edward Goucher. This glossy green variety of Abelia has a very long bloom time, from summer clear into fall. You can see that it has tubular-shaped pink blooms on arching branches that make it very attractive to bees. Interestingly, this is kind of a geek note, this variety has been around since 1911 when Edward Goucher hybridized it while working for the Department of Agriculture in Maryland. I sometimes think that these plants that have been around for so many years are just surefire winners. People wouldn't continue to sell them and grow them if they weren't a winner. It's a timeless beauty. Well, any plant that grows in the winter is kind of my favorite. This sun-loving hybrid is a hit. It has these gorgeous purple-red blossoms, and I have to tell you, I'm not a big fan of heaths and heathers. Um, I found this for sale as I was schlepping around nurseries in early February in full bloom, and people were grabbing them up like they were hotcakes. This plant will thrive in full sun, but will need a little water if we have one of those winter drought periods. Clearly, we did not have that this year, but sometimes we do. The bees love it. It's one of the things out blooming early in the earliest days when they're out foraging for food. If you lightly shear this after the bloom period, it will stimulate a denser growth, like pictured in the lower right. You can see they did a couple of different colors of heaths in here. This is Kramer's Rote is the one that produces the striking purple-red blossoms. Bob Hope Camellia, Camellia japonica Bob Hope. But what is not to love about a camellia? A plant that doesn't ask much but gives back quite a bit. This camellia has show-stopping red flowers with these gorgeous yellow stamens. It does perform best with partial shade, but it will stand some sun. It may not enjoy the very hottest sun of the hottest part of the day. I put mine against the house where it does get some morning sun, afternoon shade. And that will also protect it against wind and heavy rain showers that might damage the blossoms. The shiny foliage is attractive year-round. And of course, you know, bees would be drawn to those early blooms. Another winter bloomer, Pink Dawn Viburnum. I love my Pink Dawn Viburnum. It has lovely, fragrant pink flowers. It's like discovering Daphne or Sarcocoa again, or Sweet Box. It's fun if you have a large enough shrub to bring in the budded branches to force into bloom in a bouquet of flowers. Plant it in full sun. I will tell you that from personal experience, I know not to put it in a very soggy area that doesn't drain well. It prefers dry feet, not wet feet. And even though it's deciduous, it will offer wonderful winter interest because it has these lovely cinnamon-colored branches that you can see here. Another viburnum variety. This is the Korean spice viburnum aurora. This variety of viburnum makes a great focal point in your garden with their beautiful pink blooms that you can see here in early spring that are fragrant. And they're set off so beautifully by the dark green foliage of the plant. In the fall, this foliage will turn a reddish color. The bees and butterflies have no problem finding this fragrant plants. This medium-sized shrub can be pruned after bloom to kind of maintain its shape. Another kind of interesting geek fact, this one was developed in 1958 in Ireland after they worked for 25 years trying to breed this plant. Interesting fact. It takes a long time to produce a great plant. Victoria, California lilac, Ceanothus victoria. Now, this variety of Ceanothus is well suited to our climate, preferring well sun. Ceanothus's general plant does not like wet soil, so well-drained soil is best for this one. Dramatic indigo blue blooms that look wonderful next to the deep green of its foliage, and it is a magnet for birds, bees, and butterflies. If you prune it lightly after blooming, that will create a denser plant. The other anecdote, or another notation you should make about this plant, it really does not like to be in a windy area. So no wet feet and no windy location will create a much nicer, happier shrub. And last but not least, how about some interesting perennials? Now this lovely perennial looks like a thistle, but it is not that villain. It is long-lived, but this too prefers to be left alone and not ever crowded by other plants. I had one and I managed to kill it because it was overtaken by other plants I had in my landscape. So Take a tip from me, it likes its own space. It has lovely glossy heart-shaped leaves and a stunning lavender bloom. Not only is it deer resistant, but the bees find it extremely attractive. Now, I wish I had this variety of bleeding heart in my garden. I put it on my garden list for this year. This one has a wonderful bloom. Look how deep red it is. That looks so great with the gray-green foliage of the plant. It has a long bloom season, which is kind of great, but it will go summer dormant. So if you choose this one for those early spring blooms that probably last into the early days of summer, it's best if you pair it with like hostas or shade-loving grasses that will fill in the space after the dicentra goes dormant. If you check this one out on the Great Plant Picks page, you will see that they also make suggestions on plants to pair with this particular plant or any other plant. I always enjoy seeing what they come up with because this may be something I've never ever thought of before. Hardy Fuchsia David. Now, it is so true that bees and hummingbirds enjoy the blossoms of those hardy fuchsias. I can tell you that my garden is so blessed with those hummingbirds late into fall enjoying those blossoms. This particular fuchsia is about 3 feet by 3 feet, and I don't ever have to take care of it. It just kind of does its own thing. Great Plant Pick says it does bloom best in full sun, but I have mine planted in a real kind of open shade, and I have an abundance of flowers. This one, a sure winner for any garden that wants to attract hummingbirds. Now this yarrow is really a knockout with this beautiful yellow foliage against the silvery green to gray-green foliage. Now, this plant will bloom longer if you happen to go around and snip the spent blooms to encourage more flowering during the season. And it also appreciates a little bit of water during the hottest part of the summer. And while it's semi-evergreen, you can cut it down in late winter, early spring, and allow that new foliage to spring up anew. It's a beautiful yarrow, and we know that yarrow is very attractive to pollinators, bees and butterflies. Camassia quamash. Now, when spring rolls around, I make sure that I schedule a visit to one of two sites where this plant grows in abundance. Native to this region, the bulb produces large spikes of violet purple flowers from late March to mid to late April. They really grow well in woodland settings that are moist. In fact, sometimes I see them after just growing out of the water. It's growing in standing water. They're tough. The bulbs will multiply over time by seeding. And of course, I always dream I'm going to have a mass of blooms like this pictured on the right. Haven't quite gotten there yet. These guys grow in full sun. This is another plant that benefits from not being crowded out by other plants, particularly if you wish, to achieve a meadow-like appearance. And I'm sorry, but this is the last selection I get to talk to you about. Now, Sherry is going to share her screen, and she's going to talk about some drought-tolerant plants that you might like to add to your garden.
Okay, I have the final group. They are drought-tolerant plants. All of them share the attributes shown on the screen. I'm going to highlight 14 plants, and as Cheryl had mentioned earlier, you'll find a comprehensive list at the Great Plant Pick website of the other plants that we simply don't have time to cover. And in this group of drought-tolerant plants, some of them need full sun, but many will take shade. One even takes full shade. So I've used an icon on the screen to denote that. And I just want to highlight the word drought tolerant refers to plants after establishment. And establishment refers to the period during which a plant grows a sufficiently large root in order to deal with its environment and do well. So most plants will need supplemental water during that period, and the length of establishment varies by plant. We'll begin with some trees. Perodia has exceptional foliage, branch structure, and bark, Vanessa is a more upright selection. I planted a Perodia in the former garden, and unfortunately, there is no room in my current garden, and I really miss it. It has many virtues. In late winter, tiny red flowers appear, followed by leaves in green edged with burgundy, then slowly maturing to all green in the summer. And not long after that, it begins a sensational show of fall colors, ranging from bronze to crimson, orange, gold. And after leaf fall, the exfoliating bark and the eye-catching silhouette hold your interest through the winter month. Zelkova. Young trees grow very quickly to form a scaffold of branches, giving it a broad vase shape. It's a great shade tree for urban areas because it takes wind, pollution, and drought. The top three photos show how it looks in the spring, summer, and fall. Depending on the weather, the fall color could be soft yellow, orange, or russet. And mature trees develop interesting flaking barks with patches of gray, tanned, and reddish brown. The species does get large, matures at 50 by 50. That's the maturity for its lifetime. But there are a couple of smaller cultivars. In the lower right, the photo shows green vase that matures at 50 feet high and 30 feet wide. I think the forms are absolutely beautiful. Ginkgos get their signature look from scallop-shaped leaves. Leaves are green during the spring and summer and turn gold in the fall. While ginkgo leaves may seem delicate, some have fossilized going as far back as 200 years, telling us these trees lived in the age of dinosaurs. Perhaps it's no surprise these living fossils do well in tough urban environments. They're excellent additions to gardens. The female plants will produce edible fruits. If you don't want to deal with them, get a male tree. The president is the one featured on this screen, is a selection made by the legendary J. Frank Schmidt Company, known for their research and development that have introduced more than 100 new trees. Next, we have a conifer. Chemiciferous obtusa golden mop is the perfect name for this conifer with golden foliage. If you have a dark corner in the garden, this could be the answer. New growth is bright golden yellow and holds the color through the growing season. Older foliage turns green and serves as a perfect backdrop. The graceful mounding habit evokes the feeling of a waterfall, and golden mob looks striking when it's set off against large boulders. Next, we have some shrubs. Cistus are evergreen shrubs. The photo on the left is Cistus hybridus, the hardiest and most reliable selection. It puts on a show in late spring when the red buds cover the plant, and then they open to pure white flowers with yellow centers. OSU professor Neil Bell conducted field trials on cistus. Two of Neil's top 5 are shown on the right. On the top is cistus snowfire, and on the bottom is cistus sunset. In my garden, I have cistus Mickey in the hottest, driest corner. Mickey has green and gold variegated leaves, and it makes about a 3-inch diameter mound, 18 inches high. Cistus needs no care if you plant it correctly. When they are allowed to grow, they naturally form a lovely mound or a tall shrub. But if you try pruning to control their size, that will usually lead to disaster. Osmanthus delavayi is a versatile evergreen shrub. It grows in full sun, full shade, and everything in between. It has tiny dark green leaves and small fragrant white flowers that come in April. This plant gives you many options. You can grow it as a specimen, like the photo on the screen. It's a specimen on OSU campus, or you can clip it into a hedge. Either way, it's a really nice backdrop for something with larger or lighter color leaves. And if you want a flashier looking osmanthus, Great Plant Picks offers a couple of choices, and I show the foliage on the lower left. On the left is Osmanthus goshiki, and on the right is Osmanthus variegatus. In gardens dominated by rounded mounds, I like to use punctuation points. Skinny vertical plants like Ilex crenata mauricii add interest and make good focal points. Skinny vertical plants like Ilex crenata mauricii can add interest and make good focal points. Look closely at the photo on the left. You see dense, tiny, glossy leaves, but not the stems underneath. I just love the look. In my garden, I use Ilex Sky Pencil, which is in the photo on the right. It has a very similar look. Next up is an ornamental contorted filbert that came from Oregon State University's hazelnut breeding program. Although the program focuses on creating strains to resist Eastern filbert blight, they did by chance come up with this beauty. By the way, the OSU research program on filbert or hazelnut is the reason behind Oregon's hazelnut industry that grows 99% of the US hazelnut production. Back to Red Dragon, this beauty on the screen. Experts like the stunning combination of luscious red-purple leaves on perfectly contorted branches. The leaves hold their red-purple color most of the summer, and strong branches maintain the contorted form and need minimal or no pruning. This is the winter look that shows the contortion of the branches. Yucca. Okay, I know you've seen yuccas in that hell strip in front of a gas station, but you can't deny their architectural quality can add interest and contrast to a garden. Great Plant Picks named several yuccas, and I highlight Yucca recurvifolia, which is the spiky sphere of blue-green leaves shown in the photo on the left. When it matures, it sends up a tall spike jammed with flowers, usually in mid to late summer. It is a bee magnet. After flowering, the rosette bearing the flowers will die, but the plant continues with new shoots. Some yucca have more colorful leaves. The lower right image shows Yucca filamentosa, golden sword. I have a different variegated one in my own garden. After growing it as a rosette for about 20 years, it finally bloomed. The old plant is gone. Its place are the young offshoots. Next are a few perennials. Humboldt County fuchsia is not really a fuchsia. That's one reason we encourage the use of scientific names. This epilobium makes a tidy clump of frosted silver leaves. From midsummer on, bright orange-red flowers appear, and the hummingbirds feast on them throughout the day. I grow it in a sunny spot with reflected heat from the pavement. I also grow other epilobiums, but this one is the most robust. This is a corner of my garden, under the canopy of a neighbor's 80-foot Douglas fir and never gets supplemental water. I've tried and failed so many plants until Phlomis russeliana. This perennial has bold gray-green leaves to cover the ground year-round. Leaves are surprisingly large for a drought-tolerant plant. When growth begins in early spring, I just pull out the leaves to refresh the entire carpet. In early summer, the plants send up slender stems with whorls of yellow flowers to attract bees and butterflies. If you leave them alone, seed heads dry out to feed birds all winter. What does well in dry shade? Epimedium. I love two things about them. First, they flower in late winter, early spring, when we need every motivation to get into the garden. Second, their evergreen foliage comes in an amazing array of color and shape. It's safe to say I haven't met an epimedium I don't like. Great Plant Pick Committee recommends 30 epimediums. Drought-tolerant ones account for about half of them. In the images on the screen, I highlight Worley's, which has orange flowers. That's kind of unusual for epimediums. The lower row shows more common flower colors, which are pink, yellow, and white. And I'm going to finish with a bulb and a corm. Triteleia are West Coast natives that grow from corms. They have star-shaped flowers on wiry stems. In the pictures on top are Corina with deep violet flower. Below, Queen Fabiola in light purple flowers, and Starlight with beautiful yellow flowers. They do have leaves, but leaves come up in late winter and become dormant before the flower stems show up in late spring, early summer. I tuck Triteleia corms between plants on the hillside, and it is fun to stand at the bottom of the hill looking up at these starry flowers moving in the gentle breeze. My last plant is Colchicum. One winter, a friend gave me some large bulbs and said to plant them, which I did. A few months later, green leaves came up. I was so hopeful for great things. Then in early summer, I noticed these leaves withered away and eventually disappeared. I thought they had died. Several months later, in late September, when everything else is winding down, all of a sudden, 1 foot tall spikes push through the soil and pink flowers open all at once. What a shock. The two different looks, broad, strappy green leaves in the spring and lavender flowers in the fall, makes them interesting. No matter how many times I see these flowers, my heart still skips a beat. To me, that's what gardening is all about. Cheryl and I shared many ideas today. We hope some of them add joy to your gardening. And these are the resources that you will receive with your recording. In addition, I should go back to the list of our handouts and mention that they are also posted on the 10-Minute University web page, so you can access it anytime. And with that, I'm going to stop share. And Cheryl, do we have any questions?
I've got a really good one for you, Sherry. Um, this lady has a yucca along her driveway that is producing some small plants, and she's wondering if she can divide and transplant those successfully.
Yes, absolutely. Great idea.
Okay, that's one. The plants you listed, which you said were drought tolerant, I just wanted to clear this up. Nobody really asked this question, but I know you and I both talked about drought tolerance. And sometimes I said these plants are drought tolerant once they're established. The ones you mentioned, would you say they're drought tolerant immediately, need very little water from the get-go, or do they need a little bit of time in the beginning?
They all need water to get established, and a different plant have different length of time to get established. Part of it depends on the size of the plant at transplanting. You know, if you put a small plant into the ground, the shock is very small, and usually within a year, the plant would have established a large enough root to be able to live normally. But if you transplant a large tree, for example, where the roots had been basically hacked, and you put it
Hmm.
in the ground, usually the transplanting period is much, much longer. So, as a rule of thumb, I would say for perennials, maybe 1 year, the first year. And for trees and shrubs, 2 years or longer, depending on the size of the initial plant.
Okay, good. Because that was true of many of the ones I mentioned too. They will become drought tolerant once their rooting system becomes a substantial enough that they can survive long periods without water. Um, Epilobium,
Yeah,
just a clarifying question. Native to the Pacific Northwest?
epilobiums. I want to say they're native to California, but I'm not.
There, I did. Thank you for that question. Whoever asked that one. Yes, there are some epilobiums, not necessarily the ones Sherry mentioned, but there are some epilobium varieties that are native Pacific Northwest. Densiflorum oregonensis and oregonum, and they tend, and like you said, they're native to California. They tend to be more native to the Grants Pass, Medford, more southern parts of our state, not necessarily the really moist parts of our state.
Yes, I think that question leads to a point. I notice in the Q&A, a number of people ask about specifically whether certain plants are native to the Pacific Northwest area. And I think it's important to point out that the Great Plant Picks website has actually an entire list of PNW native plants. So
Right.
if that is your area of interest, you should just go to the website and look at lists, click PNW natives, and all the plants will be there.
Yeah, that site is so easy and so adaptable to use. And for that person that wanted to know about native pollinators, of course, native pollinators are going to be drawn to native plants. So once you get that list, you're good to go. We did get a couple people asking about the fuchsia that I showed, the hardy fuchsia, and when to prune it and when to cut it down. And this is the time when it's good to not be so leaping upon tidying up your garden. We had such a very long fall. The hummingbirds were around so late. There were blossoms still in that fuchsia. So I mean, I just turned my back and walked away. This spring, I didn't do any pruning, which really I don't really prune them until spring when I can see new growth cropping up, and I just prune them down to where the first fat buds are, and I prune them there. So hopefully that answers the question for that person about the fuchsia.
I think uh, a couple of people who are famous for growing and breeding fuchsias in Portland area had advised that you prune fuchsia either in the fall or in the spring, depending on when you have time. And
Hmm.
in the fall, they just basically cut it back some to tidy it up.
And
But
keep
in
the
the
wind from
spring,
moving it around.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But in the spring is when you really prune to shape, and you don't want to prune too early, as Cheryl mentioned. Wait until you see new growth before cutting into them.
I think that that hit all the really critical questions. I thought somebody did want to know about pruning back the red twig dogwood. Yes, of course, red twig dogwood is very prunable.
Yeah, I saw the question about coppicing specifically,
Mhm.
and essentially you cut it to 4 to 6 inches above ground. So all of
Right.
the stems are cut really harshly, and that stimulate new shoots, and the new shoots are the most colorful.
It will just reward you with more.
Yep. You know,
All right.
usually our webinars have people come from outside of our area. So
Hmm.
Great Plan Picks is a wonderful resource, but it's making recommendations for plans specific to the
Pacific Northwest,
PNW,
right?
yeah, maritime area, so not even, east of the mountains. And I just want to mention that last year we did a webinar on plant trial winners, and that session actually talked about plant trials conducted in California, elsewhere in the United States. And if you're interested, we included the link in the resource. Check that out, and you'll find more information about it. So with
Okay.
that, we should probably wrap things up.
All
But
right.
thank
And
you,
if
Cheryl. It's
people
been
think of it,
fun.
yeah, and people think of additional questions that once we're gone, be sure and send your question to 10minuteu2017@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to answer the question for you.
Good point. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.